We're in Seville, Spain, starting out with a visit to the Royal Palace. Then we'll bring you inside the Gothic Cathedral, considered by many to be the largest church in the world. The Alcázar is the royal palace of Seville, renowned as one of the most beautiful buildings in Spain. There was previously a Muslim fortress on this site about 1,000 years ago, which was entirely rebuilt in the 1300s and 1400s after the reconquest of Spain. Today, the Alcázar is an outstanding example of mudéjar architecture, which is that special blend of Muslim and Spanish styles that displays very elaborate ornamentation. Well, for the next several hundred years, the complex expanded and grew into one of the grandest palaces in Europe. Declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1987, it's one of the most popular attractions in Spain and a must-see while you're in Seville. The visit includes the Alcázar Gardens with their labyrinths of flower-lined walks and glorious date palms, bananas, orange trees, and citron groves. There really is a pleasing spot within the palace enclosure. The Alcázar is situated just next to the cathedral, so it's very easy to find it. We walked through the Alcázar with a local guide, which is always a great way to learn more about a place. You don't have to go fumbling for books or walking through without understanding what you're looking at. Let's listen in for a minute.
We are inside the Alcázar. Sometimes it is called Reales Alcázares. The word Alcázar is an Arabic word that means royal palace. We are now in the oldest royal palace of Europe, which still is in use. Since the 13th century until nowadays, this has always been the official residence of the royal family of Spain, here in Sevilla, in Andalusia. This is the courtyard from where we can see the several buildings that we have over here. Gothic Palace. That was the first palace built by the Christians when they came to Sevilla, short after the reconquest of Sevilla. Then we have the Palacio Mudéjar, which was built in the 14th century. That is the most important one. And that is the Casa de la Contratación, built in the 16th century.
The name means House of Trade, for this building was the main headquarters in Spain for bringing all the goods and treasures from the New World, which had just been discovered. This Casa de la Contratación was opened in 1503, and it performed the task of the receipt of the goods and technical and judicial activities related to it, including settling lawsuits between traders and other kinds of government functions that it continued overseeing for the next 300 years out of this building and what had been vast warehouses all around it. Now it's a museum, as is the rest of the Alcázar that we'll be now walking through. The Reales Alcázares, or Royal Palace, was first built as a smaller fortress by the Moors from the year 913 and then enlarged by their Spanish successors. It is still used occasionally by the royal family. In 1364, King Pedro I began construction of what would continue growing over the centuries into one of the most important palaces in Europe, further expanded by Ferdinand and Isabella, who used it as headquarters for their conquest of the New World. And it was later altered by the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. It is definitely worth paying the admission. This doll's court is named for these two human figures, which is a rare example in the otherwise geometric motifs. You then walk through the most beautiful Moorish arches in the entire palace, on our way to the most important room of all, the Hall of the Ambassadors. This Salón de los Embajadores is the finest apartment in the palace. The magnificent half-orange ceiling of carved wood rests on a frieze decorated with the tower and the lion. The hall is about 33 feet square and shows a splendid combination of various styles of Gothic and Renaissance. The ornamentation is rich and elaborate, almost beyond the possibility of description. You have to be here really to experience it. Most of the ceilings are carved in dark wood in a similar style, some of which looks like fine lace, especially in the gilded dome of the Ambassador's Hall, built in 1427. There are chapels and audience rooms and private living areas for the royal family, connected by chambers, short hallways, and small gardens. The rooms are decorated with elaborate, detailed carvings that cover nearly every square inch of wall and ceiling. The mostly geometric and floral patterns are done in the mudéjar style, meaning it was created by Muslim craftsmen with their traditional techniques, but during the Christian period. Muslim decorations generally do not depict any living creatures. They're mostly geometric motifs. Many of the rooms are built around spectacular courtyards in the Mediterranean tradition. A typical courtyard is carefully composed of basic elements that work together in creating a harmonious space, insulated from outside noises by the surrounding walls, and often with a lush garden and fountain in the center. Most ornamentations throughout the palace are stucco, which is made of plaster mixed with marble dust and set in place to partially dry but not completely harden, so that it could be easily shaped with a hammer and chisel. The design was planned in advance and then applied to the pliable surface to form a relief sculpture that would later harden and last for the ages. The burble of water not only provides a welcome, cool visual relief in this sometimes hot environment, but creates a relaxing sound that mesmerizes you into a peaceful mood. Birds chirping amongst the luxuriant vegetation add another dimension to the calm atmosphere. The gardens are a most pleasing spot within the enclosure. They form a delicious presence where the orange and citron diffuse their fragrance, and magic fountains spring up suddenly beneath the traveler's feet, sprinkling with the cooling dew. The gardens actually open up earlier than the palace, so if you're up first thing in the day and you want to get a head start, take a walk in the gardens, and then you can be first in line for entering the Alcázar Palace. And then you can walk up steps to the second level, which gives you a beautiful panorama view over the gardens as you stroll along through the arcaded hallway. Parts of the second floor are still utilized by the royal family today as their private residence and official rooms for functionings. The lush gardens behind the Alcázar Palace offer a serene, green oasis of terraces, fountains, flowers, and exotic trees connected by a series of long walkways with benches for you to relax on while enjoying the views. You could spend a couple of hours strolling through this verdant mix of Moorish, Renaissance, and 19th century landscape architecture. The gardens do open earlier than the palace, so you could start your visit here or save it for the end and enjoy the gardens on your way out.
We are going to see several trees like this one. This is a kapok tree, similar to the cotton, and it has these beautiful flowers that they flourish now at this time of the year, at the very end of the summer.
Alcázar is an Arab word meaning fortress, but this sprawling complex obviously became more of a pleasure palace than a military. King Pedro brought in Moorish craftsmen from Muslim-occupied Granada who applied many of the same techniques they used in construction of the Alhambra. The surviving section of Pedro's original palace is one of the finest examples of mudéjar architecture still surviving in Spain. When finished with the palace and gardens, walk across the plaza for a visit to the other most important site in town. In the next segment, we will take you into Sevilla's crowning glory, the world's largest Gothic cathedral. The Cathedral of Seville is the world's largest Gothic church. By any standard, the cathedral is unbelievably huge and amazingly beautiful. There are so many tall columns holding up the lofty ceiling, 130 feet above the floor, that it seems like you are strolling through a vast indoor stone forest. This grand church is located, of course, in the center of the historic Old Town, with several prominent landmarks next to it, the Archives Building and the Archbishop's Palace. Situated on a broad plaza, it's also located right next to the Alcázar Palace. The site of the cathedral has been for a millennia Sevilla's main religious setting. Before the cathedral was constructed, this was the location of one of the most important mosques in the Muslim world, and 2,000 years ago, it was the scene of an important Roman temple. The entrance brings you first into the gorgeous patio courtyard. This courtyard is called the Patio de los Naranjos, as in patio of the orange trees which are growing here. Formerly, it was the courtyard of the original mosque on the site that was used for cleansing for the worshippers on their way in, for ablution. This courtyard and the Giralda Tower that we'll see shortly are the only two remaining features of the original mosque. Entering the huge space, you might feel a bit lost and disoriented, stunned by the vast dimensions. You need a moment to get your bearings and get over the initial shock. So it's a good thing we have a local guide to help explain it for us.
The name of the cathedral is Santa Maria de la Sede, that is Saint Mary of the Seat. This cathedral has 23,000 square meters. This is the largest Gothic cathedral of the world. They started to build the cathedral in 1401, and the construction took 125 years. Over there, that is one of the example of one of the chapels. This chapel is called Capilla Chapel of the Antigua.
The cathedral was built so large in order to demonstrate Sevilla's wealth, as it had become a major trading center in the Middle Ages after the Reconquista in 1248. They were also in competition with the Muslims, who were still in control of Granada with their Alhambra Palace and Cordoba with the Great Mosque. Sevilla's cathedral was part of this political competition of status rivalry. They said, "We'll build a church so beautiful and grand that those who see it finished will think we are mad." The map gives you some idea of the structure, with the church as the main body and then the patio to the side. And then we have 4 major aisles through the middle of the church and the central nave, altogether a vast space. This map compares the size with St. Peter's in Rome, the world's largest church, and you see that with the patio included, it rivals St. Peter's in size. Construction here was finished when St. Peter's had just begun. So at that time, at the beginning of the 16th century, the Seville Cathedral was the largest church in the world and perhaps the largest building, the largest enclosed space, surpassing Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, the previous champion. Among many burials inside, the most notable is that of Christopher Columbus. So important because Seville was the headquarters for Spanish trade with the New World.
It is made of bronze, excepting the faces of the kings that are made of alabaster. Each king represents the 4 kingdoms of Spain in the Middle Ages. This one with the lion represents the kingdom of Leon. The other one with the castle represents the kingdom of Castile. And at the back, Aragon and Navarra.
Columbus traveled nearly as much when he was dead as when he was alive, because he was reburied several times. He died in Spain in 1506, 2 years after his final voyage, and was buried in Spain. But then he was dug up and brought back to the Dominican Republic, which is where he wanted to be buried, and he was interred there. But then after the Spanish lost that area to the French in a war, he was reburied in Havana, Cuba, and then after they lost Cuba, he was returned back to Spain and buried here in Seville, supposedly. It's still controversial. They did DNA studies of the remains in this crypt and found that, yes, it's matching the relatives of Columbus. So he's almost certainly buried here, although the Dominican Republic still claims he's buried there, but won't allow DNA testing of their remains. At the crossing where the nave meets the transept, you get the maximum impact of the size. It's 100 meters wide, 42 meters high, with a massive altar behind the screen. The main altar is from the 16th century, with the world's highest reredos screen behind it, made of carved wood and covered with gold leaf. And there are many side chapels with further elaborate decorations, especially the Royal Chapel, featuring a Renaissance. Although built in the Gothic style, starting in 1402, construction of the cathedral continued for 200 years, resulting in a delightful mix of design motifs, including Renaissance and some later Baroque flourishes. This 1402 is the very end of the Gothic period, so this really can be considered one of the last of the Gothic churches ever constructed. One can imagine heavenly music coming from this choir and massive pipe organ. And there are many side chapels with further elaborate decorations, especially the Royal Chapel, featuring a Renaissance dome. There are 80 chapels altogether, in which as many as 500 daily masses were said back in the 19th century. The size of the cathedral, in comparison to other churches in the world, is a little bit contentious. It turns out it's kind of difficult to exactly measure the interior dimensions of these vast spaces. It's certainly the largest Gothic church in the world. No question about that, by far. It is no accident that one is made to feel tiny and insignificant inside this huge space, for the creators wanted to make you humble and disoriented in the presence of God. It took the first 100 years to finish the basic structure, and another 100 years to complete the decoration and build the various chapels and side rooms. This combination of periods is typical of what you find in many of Europe's Gothic churches, but never on such an enormous scale as you will find here. By any standard, the cathedral is unbelievably huge and amazingly beautiful. Walking through it has been called one of the supreme moments of a lifetime. So grand and solemn, it strikes the visitor with amazement and awe. And then, if you like, you can climb up the world-famous Giralda Tower, former minaret of the previous mosque and now the bell tower of the cathedral.
Climb the tower, which is the entrance over there. It takes about 25 minutes to climb it, have a look around. Remember, 36 ramps. No elevator, no steps, but ramps.
Walking up the Giralda is one of the most interesting and fun things you can do while in Seville. Not only will you gain great views over the vast cathedral and surrounding rooftops of the old town, but you'll also have the unusual experience of walking up the 35 ramps that wind round. The space at the top of the Giralda is a lovely promenade. You walk all the way around the tower to get your different views looking in all the cardinal directions, 360 degrees panorama spread out down below all around you. The view from its upper gallery is another one of those sights that one can never forget, with the city spread out below as a map with white, closely packed houses looking like toys. And one looks down into patios, rooftop pools on brown and yellow tiles, along narrow streets that wind like dark thread, and then across all the housetops. Immediately below is the cathedral, next to it the Court of Oranges. It's usually quite busy with other visitors, everybody angling to get their shot, get their picture, take their view. You can sit down on one of the benches and rest for a while if you like, and just generally hang out up here for a little while. It's kind of also curious just to observe the other people. That's always part of the show whenever you visit a place, is people around you and their activities and what they're trying to do. You might get some ideas from them too. Watch their camera angles, watch how they're shooting, You might not want to be up here though when the big bells are ringing. And now the downhill walk is almost like floating down. It's a nice angle on the ramps, almost like an escalator to the bottom. The lower part of the tower was the minaret of the earlier mosque, and it was constructed in the late 12th century. You can see at the very top portions, different style of architecture, Renaissance, built by the Spanish in the 1560s. At the very top is the bronze statue La Giralda that rotates or gyrates and gives its name to the Giralda Tower. It functioned as a weather vane and a symbol of Christian faith. Back at street level, as you exit from this complex, you have a nice view looking at the outside of the patio with a combination of architectural details reflecting the Moorish and Renaissance past. Another remarkable structure in Seville is the ancient fortified wall. It originally went all the way around the city. It dates back to the Roman times, 2,000 years ago, and it was continually built and expanded and strengthened. And we see today the surviving part. A lot of it was demolished in the middle of the 19th century because it was no longer needed and the city was expanding. One reason this final part was preserved is that it was protecting the city from flooding of the Guadalquivir River. By 1600, Seville became the Western world's richest city and one of the largest, with a population of 150,000. Some of the New World booty was spent to create the great buildings which still stand here today. We continued on to another remarkable building complex, the Plaza de Espana, surrounded by a huge pavilion constructed for the 1929 World's Fair and preserved in all of its grandeur for us to enjoy today. The semicircular Palacio Español is one of the main signature sites of Seville, unlike anything you've seen before, with its mix of mudéjar and Renaissance styles anchored by high towers at each end. Colorful ceramic murals along the face of the pavilion depict the nation's provinces and include allegorical scenes from the past. In that famous movie Lawrence of Arabia, this stunning pavilion was used as the setting for the Cairo headquarters of the British Army. During the Muslim Golden Age of the 9th through the 12th centuries, southern Spain became one of the most civilized places in the world. After its recapture by Christians in 1248, Seville served as capital of a kingdom covering western Andalusia and brought an end to 500 years of Muslim control. The Age of Exploration ushered in the real golden era for Seville, which had a monopoly on all the gold and treasures flowing in from the New World throughout the 16th century. Many of the great explorers sailed from here and brought their riches back to the Spanish royal court, which often resided in Seville. We have more programs about Spain that you can find on our YouTube channel and website, along with 1,000 other movies about Europe.